Wyoming Territory, 1878. In the rugged shadows of the Wind River Mountains, where civilization barely clung to the edges of wilderness, a secret had the power to shatter more than just a reputation. The frontier demanded resilience, but for some, the weight of hidden truths could break even the strongest spirit. Delilah Patterson stood at the window of her small mercantile, absently wiping the same spot on the counter while watching dust devils dance across the main street of Riverbend. At 21, she carried herself with the bearing of someone far older, her honey-blonde hair neatly pinned beneath a simple bonnet that framed features too delicate for the harshness of frontier life. Her blue calico dress, modest and practical, concealed more than just her slender figure. "You cannot hide forever, Miss Patterson," Mrs. Holloway, the mayor's wife, said as she counted out coins for her purchase. "A respectable establishment needs a respectable proprietor." "I appreciate your concern," Delilah replied, her voice calm despite the familiar knot forming in her stomach. "Will there be anything else today?" 3 months in Riverbend had taught her to deflect questions with polite efficiency. 3 months of careful smiles and measured words. 3 months of keeping her door locked after business hours and avoiding the social gatherings that formed the backbone of frontier community life. Delilah believed in simple truths. Trust was a luxury she could not afford, vulnerability invited destruction, and the past always found a way to catch up. The frontier might promise second chances, but she knew better than to believe in such fairy tales. Her goal was survival, nothing more. After Mrs. Holloway left, Delilah locked the front door and retreated to the small living quarters behind the store. There, in the privacy of 4 humble walls, she allowed herself to breathe. She moved to the small crib tucked into the corner and gazed down at the sleeping infant, her heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. "Just you and me, little one," she whispered, gently touching the baby's soft cheek. "That is all we need." A series of sharp knocks at the store's front door startled her. Customers knew her hours ended at 6, and no one in Riverbend had reason to seek her out after business closed. Carefully placing a blanket over the crib, she moved silently to the front, peering through a crack in the curtains. A tall man stood on her porch, his broad shoulders and the easy way he wore his gun belt marking him as someone accustomed to the harsher realities of frontier life. He knocked again, more insistent this time. "Store's closed," she called through the door. "Open tomorrow at 8. "Not looking to buy anything, ma'am," came the reply, deep and steady. "Name's Zachary Weston, just rode in from Laramie. Sheriff Miller said you might have a room to let." Delilah hesitated. The small bedroom above the store had been advertised briefly when she first arrived, before she realized how difficult it would be to maintain her privacy with a boarder. She had told the sheriff weeks ago that the room was no longer available. "Sheriff's mistaken," she replied. "No rooms here." There was silence then. "Ma'am, it's nearly dark and the hotel's full up with railroad surveyors. I wouldn't trouble you, but there's a storm brewing and my horse could use the rest." Delilah bit her lip. Turning away a traveler in need went against everything her father had taught her about frontier hospitality, but the risk of letting a stranger so close to her carefully guarded secret was too great. "The livery has space for your horse," she offered, "and Mrs. Turner sometimes takes boarders, 3 doors down, white fence." She thought he might argue, but instead heard only a sigh. "Much obliged for the direction, good evening." Delilah watched through the window as he walked away, noting the easy grace of his movement despite obvious fatigue. Young, perhaps 25, with dark hair and a clean-shaven face that seemed too gentle for a man who carried himself like he knew how to use the revolver on his hip. Something about him lingered in her mind as she returned to her quarters, checking once more on the baby before preparing her simple dinner. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The next morning broke clear after the overnight storm, bringing with it the usual bustle of commerce to Riverbend's main street. Delilah opened her store promptly at 8. After ensuring the baby was comfortably settled in the hidden alcove she'd fashioned behind a curtain in the back room, close enough to hear any cries, yet concealed from customers who might need assistance beyond the counter. The bell above the door jingled shortly after 9, and Delilah looked up to find the man from the previous evening standing in her doorway. In daylight, Zachary Weston cut an even more impressive figure, tall and lean, with eyes the color of Wyoming summer skies. His clothes, though trail-worn, were neat, and he carried himself with quiet confidence. "Good morning," he said, removing his hat. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," she replied, her professional smile firmly in place. "What can I help you with today?" "Actually, I came to apologize for bothering you after hours yesterday." He glanced around the well-organized store, "and to thank you for directing me to Mrs. Turner. She had a room after all." Delilah nodded, feeling a strange relief that he had found accommodation. "We look after travelers when we can, it's the frontier way." Indeed, his gaze settled on her, thoughtful and direct. "Mrs. Turner mentioned you took over the store about 3 months ago after the previous owner passed. That's quite an undertaking for a young woman alone." The familiar wariness crept into Delilah's spine. "Mr. Holloway trained me well before his illness took him. Did you need supplies for your journey onward?" If he noticed her deflection, he didn't show it. "Actually, I might be staying in Riverbend a while. Sheriff Miller mentioned he's looking for a deputy, and I have some experience in that line." Before Delilah could respond, a faint cry came from the back room. Her heart froze. Zachary's eyebrows rose slightly. "Sounds like you have company back there." "Just a stray cat I've been feeding," Delilah lied, moving toward the curtain. "If you'll excuse me a moment." Of course, he picked up a tin of tobacco from a nearby display. "I'll just have a look around while you tend to your cat." Delilah slipped behind the curtain, her hands trembling as she lifted the fussing infant. "Shh, Emma," she whispered, bouncing her gently. "We must be quiet now." She changed the baby quickly and gave her a small bottle she had prepared earlier, praying the child would settle before any other customers arrived. When Emma finally drifted back to sleep, Delilah carefully laid her in the hidden crib and returned to the store. Zachary Weston stood at the counter, a selection of items neatly arranged before him. "Found what I needed," he said. "And a few things I didn't know I needed until I saw them." His smile was warm, reaching all the way to those remarkable eyes. Delilah began tallying his purchases, desperately hoping he hadn't heard enough to question her hastily invented explanation. "Will there be anything else?" "Just one thing," he replied, his voice dropping slightly. "If you're ever in need of help with anything at all, even something as simple as a troublesome stray, I'd be glad to lend a hand. Sometimes the frontier can be a mighty lonely place, without neighbors willing to help." Their eyes met briefly, and Delilah felt a discomforting sense that this man saw more than she wanted anyone to see. "That's very kind, but I manage well enough on my own." "No doubt." He paid for his purchases and gathered them into his saddlebag. "Still, the offer stands." After he left, Delilah found herself staring at the door, an unfamiliar sensation stirring within her chest. It had been so long since anyone had offered her help without expectation, she barely recognized the feeling of comfort it brought. Shaking it off, she reminded herself that comfort was dangerous, it led to trust, and trust had betrayed her before. The next 2 weeks brought Zachary Weston into her store regularly. True to his word, he had taken the deputy position, and Delilah couldn't help noticing how quickly the town had embraced him. He had a way of listening that made people feel heard, a genuine kindness that crossed the barriers of class and circumstance so prevalent even in a frontier town like Riverbend. Despite her caution, Delilah found herself looking forward to his visits. He never stayed long, just enough to purchase small necessities and exchange pleasantries, but his presence brought a warmth to her carefully ordered world that both comforted and terrified her. On a particularly busy Saturday, with the store crowded with ranchers' wives stocking up for the week, disaster nearly struck. Emma, usually content during her afternoon nap, began wailing inconsolably from the back room. The sudden silence that fell over the store made Delilah's blood run cold. "Is that a baby?" Mrs. Henderson asked, her voice sharp with curiosity. Before Delilah could form a response, the door opened and Deputy Weston stepped in, his arms full of packages. "Ladies," he greeted cheerfully, "I hope I'm not interrupting. Miss Patterson, these arrived on the afternoon stage for you." His voice, deliberately loud, drew attention away from the continuing cries. As the women turned to watch him navigate the crowded store with his burden, Delilah slipped behind the curtain. Emma's face was flushed with distress, her little body rigid with discomfort. Delilah lifted her, heart pounding with dual fears for her child's unexplained pain and for the secret now teetering on the edge of exposure. A soft knock on the doorframe made her turn. Zachary stood there, his expression gentle. "The ladies are all busy examining the new fabric shipment," he said quietly. "Take your time, I'll mind the counter." Gratitude and suspicion warred within her. "You don't have to." "I insist." His gaze dropped to the crying infant. "Looks like she might have colic. My sister's youngest had it something fierce. Holding her on her tummy across your arm sometimes helps." Before Delilah could question how he knew, he disappeared back into the store, his voice rising as he apparently began describing the fabric selection to the gathered women with impressive detail for a bachelor deputy. Desperate, Delilah tried his suggestion, laying Emma face down along her forearm with gentle support to her head. Within minutes, the baby's rigid body relaxed and her cries subsided to whimpers, then ceased altogether. When she finally emerged, the store was empty save for Zachary, who leaned against the counter with an expression that mingled concern and something else she couldn't quite name. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for the rescue he had provided. "Seems your cat has grown considerably since I first heard it," he replied, his tone gentle despite the implied question. Delilah felt the weight of her secret pressing down. "Deputy Weston." "Zach," he corrected, "and before you try to explain, you should know that whatever your circumstances, your secrets are safe with me." He straightened, reaching for his hat. "I just wanted to make sure you knew you're not as alone here as you might believe." As he turned to leave, Delilah found herself speaking without intention. Would you like some coffee?" "As a thank you." The smile that transformed his face made something flutter in her chest. "I'd like that very much, Miss Patterson." "Delilah," she offered, surprising herself again. That evening, with Emma sleeping peacefully in her crib, Delilah and Zach sat at her small kitchen table, the lamplight casting warm shadows across their faces. He spoke of growing up on a small ranch in Colorado, of losing his parents to a fever that swept through their community when he was 16, of raising his younger sister until she married 2 years ago. "What brought you to Wyoming?" Delilah asked, finding it surprisingly easy to talk with him. "Restlessness at first," he admitted. "After Susanna married, I drifted for a while. Tried my hand at cattle driving, mining, even ran with a survey crew for the railroad." His expression turned thoughtful, "but it was more than that. I think I was looking for something I couldn't quite name." "And have you found it?" The question slipped out before she could consider its implications. His eyes met hers across the table. "I'm beginning to think I might have." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibility that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. Delilah looked away first, gathering their empty cups. "It's getting late," she said, "and I'm sure the sheriff expects his deputy bright and early tomorrow." Zach rose, understanding her need to retreat. "Thank you for the coffee and the company." At the door he paused. "Delilah, whatever brought you and Emma to Riverbend, whatever you're running from, you deserve to find peace here." After he left, Delilah stood by the window, watching his tall figure move down the darkened street. His words echoed in her mind, stirring longings she had buried beneath layers of fear and determination. For the first time since arriving in Riverbend, she allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to belong, to trust, to build something more than a hiding place. The thought terrified her. Spring advanced into early summer, bringing longer days and the promise of renewed life to the high country. Delilah found herself caught in a gentle transformation she hadn't anticipated. Zach's presence in her life, always respectful, never demanding, had begun to chip away at the walls she had built around her heart. He came by most evenings after his duties ended, often bringing small gifts. A carved wooden rattle for Emma, fresh berries from the hills outside town, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. They would sit on the small porch behind the store, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains while Emma cooed and gurgled on a blanket at their feet. Delilah had begun to share pieces of her story, her childhood on a farm in Missouri, her father's death during the war, her mother's remarriage to a stern man who saw his stepdaughter as little more than unpaid labor. She spoke of her dream to teach someday, of the books she treasured, of the simple pleasures that sustained her. But the central truth, the circumstances of Emma's birth, the reason for her flight westward, remained unspoken between them, a shadow that grew longer as her feelings for Zach deepened. "You're different lately," Mrs. Turner observed one afternoon as Delilah measured fabric for her new curtains. "There's color in your cheeks that wasn't there before." Delilah smoothed the calico with careful hands. "Must be the summer air." "Must be Deputy Weston," the older woman countered with a knowing smile. "Half the unmarried ladies in town are green with envy over his attentions to you." "We're friends," Delilah insisted, though the word felt insufficient for the connection that had grown between them. "Friends," Mrs. Turner echoed skeptically. "Well, whatever you call it, it suits you. You were fading away when you first came here, holding yourself so tight I thought you might shatter. Now you're blooming." That evening, as they walked along the river path with Emma bundled securely against Delilah's chest, Zach seemed unusually quiet. They stopped at a bend where the water widened into a calm pool, reflecting the golden light of approaching sunset. "I received a letter today," he said finally, "from the marshal in Laramie." Delilah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. "Oh. There's been inquiries about a young woman traveling with an infant." He turned to face her, his expression grave. "From Missouri." The ground seemed to shift beneath her feet. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing yet," Zach's eyes held her steadily. "But Delilah, if someone's looking for you, if there's trouble following you, I can't help unless I know what we're facing." The word we caught in her heart, the simple inclusion, the offered alliance. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine sharing her burden, placing her trust in this man who had shown nothing but kindness and respect. But fear, old, familiar fear, surged back. "There's nothing to tell," she said, her voice tight. "And I don't need help." Hurt flashed across his face. "After all these weeks, you still can't trust me enough to be honest." "Trust gets people hurt," she replied, stepping back from him. "I learned that lesson well before I ever came to Wyoming." "Not all men are the same, Delilah." His voice was soft, but she heard the disappointment beneath it. "Not all promises are meant to be broken." They walked back to town in silence, the distance between them suddenly vast despite their physical proximity. At her door, Zach touched his hat briefly. "Good night, Miss Patterson." The formality stung more than she expected. She watched him walk away, Emma stirring against her chest as if sensing her distress. Inside, surrounded by the comforting familiarity of her small quarters, Delilah finally allowed herself to weep, for the fear that never truly left her, for the connection she had begun to believe in, for the trust she couldn't bring herself to give. The next morning, a telegram arrived that shattered what remained of her fragile peace. "He knows where you are. Stop coming for the child. Stop. Run now." The unsigned message needed no explanation. Only her childhood friend Martha knew where she had fled, and the warning was clear. Judge Samuel Harrington, one of the wealthiest and most influential men in Missouri, had discovered their location. He was coming for Emma, his granddaughter, born of a brief, secret romance between Delilah and the judge's son, Thomas. Thomas had promised marriage, had sworn his father would accept their union once he knew of the child. Instead, when Delilah revealed her pregnancy, Thomas had crumbled under his father's fury. The judge had offered a devil's bargain: surrender the child to the Harrington name and leave Missouri forever, or face ruin and imprisonment on false charges of theft from the Harrington estate where she had worked as a housekeeper. Delilah had chosen a third path, disappearing into the night with Martha's help, traveling west with her unborn child, determined to outrun the judge's influence and raise Emma in freedom. Now that freedom was threatened. Delilah spent the day in a fog of terror and desperate planning. She could take the evening stage, travel north into Montana Territory, lose herself again in another small town. She had enough money saved to start over again, though the thought of another flight, another series of lies, another lonely existence made her soul ache. As she packed their meager belongings after closing the store, a knock at the back door startled her. She froze, heart pounding, until Zach's voice called softly, "Delilah, are you there?" Relief and renewed fear warred within her as she opened the door. He took one look at the half-filled carpet bag on her bed and understood immediately. "You're running again." "I have to," she said, turning back to her packing. "It's not safe here anymore." Zach closed the door behind him, crossing to where Emma slept in her crib. He touched the baby's cheek gently. "Who's coming for her?" Delilah's hands stilled on the clothing she was folding. "How did you know someone was coming for her specifically?" "Because a mother who hides her child the way you've hidden Emma isn't running from shame," he said quietly. "She's running from someone who wants to take that child away." The simple truth of his observation broke something loose inside her. The story poured out her position in the Harrington household, Thomas's courtship, the promises made and broken, the judge's threats, her desperate flight west. "He has connections everywhere," she finished, her voice hoarse from the telling. "Judges, lawmen, politicians, his influence reaches further than I ever imagined. If he finds us," she couldn't complete the thought. "He'll take Emma and destroy you," Zach finished for her. "That's what you believe." "That's what I know," she corrected. "You don't understand what men like Judge Harrington can do." "Actually, I do," Zach's expression hardened. "Before I came to Wyoming, I spent 2 years as a deputy marshal in Kansas. I've seen powerful men abuse that power. I've also seen them fall when faced with the right kind of opposition." He moved to her then, taking her trembling hands in his. "Delilah, running might keep you one step ahead for a while, but you'll never be free as long as you're looking over your shoulder. There comes a time when you have to stand and fight for what's yours." "With what weapons?" she asked bitterly. "I have no money for lawyers, no influential friends, no proof of anything except that I bore a child out of wedlock." "You have me," he said simply, "and I know more about the law than the judge might expect from a frontier deputy." The offer of alliance shook her. "Why would you risk yourself for us?" "You barely know me." Something shifted in his gaze, a vulnerability that matched her own. "I think you know that's not true anymore. These past weeks, I've come to know a woman of extraordinary courage and tenderness. A mother who would sacrifice everything for her child. A person I've grown to care for more deeply than I thought possible." His words unlocked the feelings she had tried so hard to deny. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "not just of the judge, but of believing that someone could stand with me instead of leaving when things become difficult." "Then let me prove it to you," Zach said, his hands tightening around hers. "Let me show you what it means to have someone fight alongside you, not against you." In that moment, with Emma sleeping peacefully nearby and Zach's steady presence before her, Delilah made a choice that went against every instinct for self-preservation she had developed. She chose to trust. "What do we do?" she asked. The smile that transformed his face kindled something warm and unfamiliar in her heart. "First, we stop packing. You're not going anywhere." Together, they formulated a plan. Zach would telegraph contacts from his marshal days, seeking information about Judge Harrington that might be used as leverage. Delilah would continue business as usual, no longer hiding Emma but openly acknowledging her as her daughter. They would prepare legal documents establishing Delilah's guardianship and detailing Thomas's abandonment. "The most important thing," Zach emphasized, "is that you're no longer alone in this fight. Whatever comes through that door, we face it together." Later that night, after Zach had left to send his telegrams, Delilah stood over Emma's crib, watching her daughter's peaceful sleep. For the first time since fleeing Missouri, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by fear, a future where Emma would grow up secure in her mother's love, perhaps even with a father who had chosen her rather than abandoned her. The thought brought both hope and terror. To believe in such possibilities was to risk devastating disappointment. Yet something in Zach's unwavering confidence had kindled a spark of courage she had thought extinguished. "Perhaps we can stop running," she whispered to her sleeping child. "Perhaps we can finally find home." The following week brought a flurry of activity to Riverbend. Zach's telegrams yielded information about Judge Harrington that proved valuable, reports of questionable land dealings, allegations of judicial impropriety that had been quietly settled, a pattern of using his position to intimidate those who opposed him. "Not enough to bring him down," Zach admitted, "but enough to make him think twice about pursuing a public custody battle that might invite scrutiny of his own affairs." Delilah found unexpected support among the townspeople once she began appearing in church with Emma in her arms. Mrs. Turner organized a belated welcome for the baby, bringing gifts and good wishes from women who had previously viewed Delilah with suspicion. Even Mrs. Holloway, after an initial show of disapproval, offered the services of her husband, who had practiced law before becoming mayor. Unmarried motherhood is one thing, she sniffed, but allowing a child to be taken from her mother by force is quite another. Riverbend protects its own. The sense of community that enfolded her was as startling as it was comforting. After years of isolation, first in the Harrington household, then in her desperate flight westward, the simple act of being accepted despite her circumstances felt like a miracle. Zach was a constant presence, dividing his time between his deputy duties and helping Delilah prepare for the confrontation they knew was coming. In the evenings, they would sit on her porch, planning and talking, their conversations ranging from serious strategy to shared dreams for the future. "I never thought I would have this," Delilah confessed one night, Emma sleeping against her shoulder. "People who know my story and still choose to stand with me." "That's what real community means," Zach replied, his hand finding hers in the gathering twilight. "It's not about perfection or pretense. It's about accepting each other's flaws and fighting each other's battles when necessary." His fingers intertwined with hers, strong and steady. "Delilah, when this is over, when Emma's future is secure, I want you to know that my feelings for you go beyond friendship or alliance." She looked up at him, this man who had shown her what true strength looked like, not domination or control, but steady support and unwavering loyalty. "Mine too," she whispered. The moment hung between them, full of possibility until Emma stirred and broke the spell. But something had changed, a commitment made without words that carried them through the tense days of waiting. The judge arrived on a Tuesday, the crispness of his Eastern suit and imperious manner immediately setting him apart from Riverbend's usual visitors. He came directly to the store, flanked by two men whose watchful eyes and bulging jackets suggested they were more than mere traveling companions. Delilah was alone when the bell above the door announced his arrival. She had been expecting him, had rehearsed this moment countless times with Zach, yet the sight of Samuel Harrington's cold, assessing gaze still sent fear coursing through her. "Miss Patterson," he said, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a man accustomed to obedience. "Or should I say, Miss Preston, you've led me on quite a chase." Delilah straightened behind the counter, her hands clasped to hide their trembling. "Judge Harrington, I wish I could say it was a pleasure to see you again." "Where is the child?" he demanded, dispensing with any pretense of civility. "My daughter is with friends," she replied, grateful that Mrs. Turner had taken Emma for the morning, "and she will remain with me, her mother." The judge's thin lips curved in a smile that never reached his eyes. "I think not. You are an unmarried woman of questionable character who absconded with my grandchild. I have papers from Missouri declaring me her legal guardian in light of her father's unfortunate passing." The news of Thomas's death struck her with unexpected force. Though he had betrayed her, she had never wished him harm. "Thomas is dead." "A riding accident 3 months ago," the judge said dismissively, "which leaves me as the child's only legitimate family. I've arranged for us to depart on tomorrow's stage. You will bring the infant to the hotel this evening, or my associates will help locate her." His gaze hardened. "And I assure you, their methods are most thorough." Before Delilah could respond, the door opened again and Zach stepped in, Sheriff Miller beside him. "Judge Harrington," Zach said, his voice coolly professional, "I believe you received my telegram regarding Emma Patterson's legal status here in Wyoming Territory." The judge turned, irritation flashing across his features at the interruption. "Deputy Weston, I presume. Your message was presumptuous and irrelevant. The child's custody was determined by a court in Missouri." "A court where you presided," Zach noted, "which presents certain questions of judicial propriety that Governor Warren might find interesting." He withdrew several papers from his vest. "I've taken the liberty of forwarding some documents to his office regarding your involvement in the Missouri Central Railroad land acquisitions. Curious timing on those property seizures that benefited your northern holdings." Color drained from the judge's face. "You dare threaten me? Do you have any idea who I am?" "A man who's about to learn that Wyoming Territory isn't Missouri," Sheriff Miller interjected, his weathered face stern. "And that we take a dim view of outsiders trying to bully our citizens." What followed was a battle of wills and legal maneuvering that lasted well into the evening. The town council was convened in emergency session at the mayor's house. Documents were examined, telegrams sent and received, voices raised in argument. Through it all, Delilah sat with Emma in her arms, drawing strength from the solid presence of Zach beside her and the surprising advocacy of Mayor Holloway, who systematically dismantled the judge's claims with the precision of his former legal training. The simple fact remains, Holloway concluded, that Wyoming Territory law recognizes the natural right of a mother to her child in the absence of proof of unfitness. Your Missouri guardianship papers, obtained without the mother's knowledge or participation, have no standing here. This isn't over, Judge Harrington snarled, gathering his papers. I have friends in territorial government who will receive copies of these affidavits regarding your judicial conduct if you pursue this matter further, Zach interrupted, placing a sealed envelope on the table. Along with sworn statements from 3 former servants of your household regarding your treatment of Miss Patterson during her employment. The judge's gaze darted between the envelope, Zach's resolute expression, and the unified front of Riverbend's leadership. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. The stage leaves at noon tomorrow, Sheriff Miller said, rising to his feet. I suggest you be on it, Judge, alone. As the meeting dispersed, Delilah remained seated, Emma sleeping against her shoulder, the reality of what had just occurred slowly sinking in. They had stood against one of the most powerful men she had ever known, and won. Zach knelt beside her chair. Are you all right? She looked into his face, this man who had changed everything by simply believing in her right to happiness. He's really leaving. Without Emma. He is. Zach's hand came up to touch Emma's back gently. He knows when he's beaten, and he has too much to lose by pressing further. His reputation means everything to him. I can't believe it's over, she whispered, tears filling her eyes. All these months of running, hiding, being afraid. It's over, he confirmed, taking her free hand in his. You and Emma are safe. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be. The next day, they stood together on the boardwalk outside her store, watching Judge Harrington's stage disappear in a cloud of dust. The man hadn't spoken another word to Delilah, though the look he gave her as he boarded suggested the depth of his fury at being thwarted. But he had gone, and with him, the shadow that had hung over her life since learning of her pregnancy. I can hardly believe it, she said, Emma cooing happily in her arms. We're truly free. Zach's arms slipped around her shoulders, drawing her close to his side. Free to build whatever life you want. She looked up at him, this man who had shown her what true strength and partnership could be. What we want, she corrected softly, if that's still what you want too. His answer came not in words but in the gentle press of his lips against hers, their first kiss, filled with promise and tenderness and the certainty of belonging. When they parted, his smile held all the warmth of the Wyoming summer. I've been thinking about that room above your store, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. The one you weren't renting when I first arrived. What about it? She asked, her heart suddenly racing. Well, it seems to me that Emma's going to need more space as she grows, and this store could use a man around for the heavy lifting. His expression grew serious. I'm asking if you might consider a more permanent arrangement, Delilah, one that would make us a family in truth as well as in heart. Joy pure and unexpected welled within her. Are you proposing, Deputy Weston? I believe I am, Miss Patterson. His arms tightened around her. I love you, Delilah, you and Emma both. I want to build a life with you, right here in Riverbend if you'll have me. Yes, she whispered, all her doubts and fears dissolving in the certainty of his love. Yes, I'll have you. As summer turned to autumn in the Wyoming high country, Delilah Patterson became Delilah Weston in a simple ceremony at the newly completed church. Emma, dressed in white lace sewn by the women of Riverbend, watched with solemn blue eyes as her mother pledged herself to the man who had chosen to be her father in all the ways that truly mattered. The mercantile expanded, thriving under their joint management. The rooms above the store became a home filled with laughter and love. And when winter came, bringing snow to the distant peaks and golden light to their windows, Delilah found herself cherishing the quiet evenings by the fire, Emma sleeping peacefully in her crib while Zach read aloud from one of their shared books. "Are you happy?" he asked one night, setting the book aside to draw her into his embrace. Delilah thought of all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment, the pain and fear that had led her to Wyoming, the courage it had taken to stop running, the trust she had finally found in this man and this community. "Happier than I ever believed possible," she answered truthfully. "I came to Riverbend looking for a place to hide, but I found something much more valuable." "What's that?" he asked, his fingers threading gently through her hair. "Home," she said simply. "I found home." Outside, snow began to fall, each flake a promise of renewal, of seasons changing and life continuing. Within their warm rooms, the small family that had been forged through courage and love remained sheltered together, safe at last from the storms that had once threatened to tear them apart.